Today's episode is brought to you by the Whole Life Decluttering Workshop, featuring a proprietary 6-step system, the Simple System, to help you declutter your life in a way that will last. Purchase this workshop on demand and receive the video training and dedicated workbook at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
Your screws in your life and your career are going to fall out. The why is important, but it's how you put them back in that really matters. Life is not a straight line, and it's up to you to decide how you're going to put those screws back in. It may be at a time in your life where you just have to put them back in the way they were because you're not quite ready yet to make this change, whatever this change is. But when they fall out a second time, take a step back and think about it really hard, because eventually, if we talk about the door, those screws are going to get rusty enough that they're not going to go back in. And then what? The why is important because you want to make sure you don't repeat your mistakes, but the how you put them back in is going to be your present and your future. That's where you're going. And this is an opportunity that's being presented to you. When those screws fall out, it's not a negative, it's an opportunity.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zawrotny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a productivity coach certified in positive psychology and stress management. Join me as we explore ways to live a more proactive, positive life with episodes on productivity, self-awareness, mindset, entrepreneur life, habits and systems, simplicity, fun, and more. I understand overwhelm personally as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and as a caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and today's episode features fun and nostalgia with a personal growth twist. I'm all for learning and personal development, and many of the episodes on the podcast focus on that. But we need to make sure what we do is fun and easy. We also need to work on reflection and awareness, and this episode taps into all of that. Have you noticed how everywhere around us, in songs and shows and our favorite movies, there are amazing lessons to be had? I felt that way most recently while watching Ted Lasso. If you know, you know. I adore that show. But you can find life lessons everywhere, including shows from your youth. Today, we're heading to the 80s to search for nuggets of wisdom. Now, I'll admit that I have watched some movies with my kids more recently, and they've not held up too well in some aspects, but I still believe there are some incredible messages within them that we can take away. Joining me on this walk down memory lane is Chris Clews, a keynote speaker, author, and 80s pop culture guy. Chris left his corporate marketing career of over 20 years to become a speaker and author focused on the life and work lessons learned from 80s pop culture. He's passionate about animal rescue and donates a portion of the proceeds from his book sales and speaking gigs to rescues. You can find his 3 books via the resources page of the positivelyproductive.com website. Look for the Positively Living Podcast resources list. If you like the life lessons vibe of this episode and you appreciate the focus on fun, you'll also want to check out episode 48, where my business humorist guest, Lisa, teaches us how to reduce stress and connect more, and has me doing improv on my own podcast. It's ridiculous, but it's fun. And episode 56 with my guest, Jeff, who shows you how play can help you conquer your inner critic. And as a bonus, the episode just before that includes life lessons inspired by podcasting. If you're curious which movies we feature in today's conversation, let me give you a hint. One involves martial arts and a lesson in how to deal with bullies. One is about young treasure seekers who find friendship and teamwork is their most valuable asset. And the last features a set of teens from all walks of life reflecting on who they are. Any guesses? I'm excited to dig into these movies with you, and my guest does a great job of summarizing them, as well as choosing aspects of them that lean into personal growth topics like stress management, inclusion, change, and resilience. I'd love to know if you have any movies or songs from your youth that inspire you in the same way. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it on social media and tag me and share your favorites. Now let's join Chris to talk about unexpected life lessons from 80s movies. Chris, welcome to the Positively Living podcast. I am really excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lisa. I just appreciate the megaphone that independent podcasters like you provide to people like me to give us a chance to get our voice out there. So thanks.
Well, our voices and the messages behind them are so important, and this one's a fun one, which makes me extra happy. But before we dig into our topic of the day, please tell us a bit about who you are and what makes you light up.
I am a speaker and author. I actually was in corporate marketing for about 20 years, but we'll get to that a little bit later with one of the things that we're going to talk about. I'm now a keynote speaker and author, and I talk and write about the lessons for life and work that we can learn from 80s pop culture. Mainly the movies, but a few musicians. And I often talk about the idea of some of the best lessons for our life and work will come from the most unexpected of places and people. And 80s pop culture is one of those places. And the awesome, totally awesome characters that were inside of 80s pop culture are those people.
I think John Hughes was like, yeah, I totally knew there were tons of life lessons in here. I'm glad you guys caught up. But I think that's fun because for so many of us, these are, iconic shows that we've watched repeatedly, and being able to look like through a new lens to see them and kind of pick out something else, something new, and maybe especially something that applies to us right now is amazing. Plus, it's fun to watch. So I'm going to open up the floor to where we want to go with these life lessons. And I know we talked about three movies in particular, but which would you like to start with, Chris?
I'm going to go back real quick because you said what lights you up. And what lights me up is my rescue dog, Bodie, who is at my feet right now. He's a pit mix. I have a huge spot in my heart for the pit bulls and the bully breeds, and he's at my feet right now. So that's what lights me up.
Oh, I'm so glad that you jumped in there. I figured you might mention something that lights you up as we kept going, but quick shout out to Bodie. Can we see him online anywhere?
Oh, yeah. He's all over my social media.
Nice. All right, so Bodhi's on your social media, and so is 80s pop culture. So what's the first place we're going to start today, Chris?
I talk about a lot of different 80s movies, but we're going to focus on ones that I think most people have seen. And the first one we'll start with was we're going to go back to 1984. Actually, there's a popular series on Netflix right now that has continued the journey of some of these characters from back in 1984, and that is The Karate Kid and what The Karate Kid can teach us, which is actually a lot. Mr. Miyagi, I think every line of dialogue of his taught us something. Just an incredible character. And I don't know if you want me to just kind of give a little plot synopsis for those that may not have seen it.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. Cobra Kai is huge, but still, I think with the plot synopsis, we'll also be able to feed into the nuggets of wisdom that are in there. So go for it.
The story basically is Daniel LaRussa is the new kid in town. He has come with his mom. They've traveled westward from the East Coast to the West Coast. And if anybody's been the new kid, you know it's a struggle. He gets bullied quite a bit and ends up getting beat up. And Mr. Miyagi takes him under his wing and he teaches him karate for self-defense, but also for discipline and patience and all of the great life lessons that we can learn from martial arts. And so beyond that, as he gets kind of started in this relationship with Mr. Miyagi, and he has this interesting way of training him. And a lot of it, as I said, is about patience. And it's also about form. And it's about consistency, doing the same thing over and over again. There is the whole wax on, wax off that I think a lot of people remember. And even if you haven't seen the movie, you've probably heard that phrase. It's during a time where he is having him do a chore waxing his cars, his really nice car collection. And Daniel gets rewarded for that later on. And then at one point, he has him painting the fence. And during this entire scene, one of the things he says to Daniel is, he says, wax on, wax off. And then he says, don't forget to breathe. Very important. And this is the line that captured my attention. The idea of breathing, not the involuntary act, because we do that 17,000 or 30,000 times a day. And I'm here to tell you that if I had to think about that, I wouldn't have made it past 2 or 3 years old. I mean, I just would not have made it. My brain doesn't function like that. So glad that we just do it without thinking. We're talking about breathing in the different sense. And so typically what I say to people is, if you're listening out there, I want you to think of someone or something that stresses you out. Probably someone for most of us. And when I'm speaking to audiences, you can see people's shoulders start to go up, their jaws start to clench, they're thinking really bad thoughts in their head. And it happens really quickly. And it goes to show how stressed we are all the time, that a simple statement like think of someone or something that stresses you out can have this kind of impact on us physically and mentally so fast. It means it's right there on the surface all the time. And so when I talk about breathing, and I talk to leaders about this with their teams, that leaders, you have to take time to breathe. You have to allow your teams time to breathe. And what do I mean by that is breathing could mean playing with your dog, your cat, your kids, having a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, meditating, yoga, working out, running, walking. There is something in your life that allows you to just kind of escape from the things that are stressing you out. And when you're starting to feel that, that's when you need to do it. Because if you've ever had a bout of dehydration, stress is like dehydration. By the time you realize you have it, it's too late. Listen, stress is doing the same thing to us all the time. And unfortunately, what happens when we can't hold it in anymore? We say something we regret. We might snap at someone. We get short with somebody. Something comes out of our mouth that we don't like. Or worse, we become unhealthy. And we don't know until that health issue shows itself. And a lot of times those things can be stress related. And so it's important to take that time to breathe. Leaders, if you're listening, make sure you give your team members time to breathe. If they're really feeling it, we all have meetings that we just have to be at. But if this is one of those flexible meetings and one of your team members says, I'm just feeling it, can we push this back an hour? Give them that flexibility. It'll make all the difference in their ability to do their job, but also their health and their wellness. It's so important. I know there's meetings we have to be at a certain time, but it's important to do that. And leaders take time to breathe, because we talk about this other thing that rolls downhill and takes everybody out with it. Well, stress rolls downhill and it does the same thing, except worse, is that it's going to create a stressful environment where people don't want to be around you anymore. And in life, that's no fun because you become isolated and alone. And in the workplace, it's no good either, because now employee retention is an issue. Employee motivation is an issue. So this simple phrase, don't forget to breathe, very important, is a really great one from Mr. Miyagi, and it teaches us about stress management.
Yeah, and so much in there, the pausing, the playing, the idea too that the stress that we hold on to, like you said, you could blow up, say the wrong thing, have some relationship issues, whether it's work or home, but also too, when we hold it in. And then we're, building resentment and constantly feeling this stress and this pressure, then this works itself into sickness. I mean, we struggle with so many things. So managing stress, breathing, all of that. And the fact that intentional breathing is absolutely part of it, but that it's really about the idea of pausing, about breaking. And to your point, sometimes there are things we just have to do. I'm a business owner, I'm a mom, I get it, lots of those things. But also, it's acknowledging that maybe you do that thing, you do the difficult thing, you do the thing that you know is going to rile you up. And then you intentionally create space after to recover.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's part of in the workplace. If you're not an entrepreneur like myself, where you're doing everything, you have to recognize that the people on your team are going to need that time as well. And listen, we're human. We're not robots. We're going to make mistakes, and we're going to swallow stress sometimes. And then we're going to say something that we regret. It's inevitable. I mean, this life journey, we're messy. Humans are messy. Life is messy. However, if you recognize that you're always walking around with stress, I mean, most people are, it's just a fact of life,
Yep.
then you can start to handle it a little bit better, understanding that it's always there beneath the surface, and to make sure to take those breaks.
I love that. I mean, there's so many different and fantastic takeaways, but the bonus thing that I was thinking of when you were describing his training, the wax on and wax off, is the connectivity of everything that we do. And that's something that I talk about in productivity. Holistic productivity is the idea of there's so much that we do, that we experience, that impacts how we show up. And the more that we can acknowledge that and then take the time, take the pause, breathe, the better off. That's awesome. Okay. So that was Karate Kid. What you got next for me, Chris?
Well, we'll stick to like these really kind of iconic 80s movies, and we'll go with one that is about a group of kids trying to save their neighborhood. And this one is The Goonies. And I always tell people that if you have kids that are 9, 10, somewhere in that range, and you want to start introducing them to 80s movies, this is a really good one to start with because it is that kind of family friendly 80s movies where there's humor for the adults that kind of goes right over the kids' heads. But the kids really enjoy it because it is a story about these kids who are trying to save their town from a developer and they're powerless to do it, but they find a treasure map left by the pirate One-Eyed Willie and they think, hey, if we can find this treasure, we might be able to save our town. And so they go off on this adventure. And it is just the quintessential 80s movie Spielberg when he was doing all of this really fun adventure stuff. It was just his sweet spot. And it was a really great time to be alive having the Goonies in the theater and paying $2 to see it.
Having the Goonies, and then I'm also thinking about Indiana Jones, right? There were so many good adventure movies. But to your point, these are kids here who get to be the heroes, who get to go on the adventure and discover things.
Yeah, and so the focal point is the kids, and there's a lot of lessons in this movie about teamwork and working together and solving problems and challenges together and recognizing that each person has a piece in that. And so we're going to focus though on two of the characters, Chunk, who was one of the original, or we would say the OG Goonie. If you remember him, if you saw the movie, you remember him doing the truffle shuffle to try to get into the house. Just a great character who's now like an incredible entertainment attorney, by the way. But he went on to go behind the scenes. And so we're going to talk Chunk and another character named Sloth, who comes into the Goonies after the fact. And so here's what happens. There's a family of bandits called the Fratellis, the Fratelli family. They're also trying to get to the treasure, and they're adults, and they will do anything to get this treasure. They don't see these as kids. Like they'll do whatever they need to do. They capture Chunk, and they put him in the basement, and he looks around and he sees this massive mountain of a human named Sloth, who is also a Fratelli. But the family has chained him up in the basement because of the way he looks. He's got this cone-shaped head and crooked ears and missing teeth, and his eyes are misshapen. And Chunk at first is intimidated. Now, this is a big person, actually played by an ex-Oakland Raider named John Matuzak. Big, imposing person. At first, Chunk is scared. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to react. But he quickly decides, I want to make friends with this person. And he has an offering of a Baby Ruth candy bar. And this sets off a friendship because Sloth has never had anybody really care about him. And Chunk has this huge heart. And I think he recognizes that pretty quickly that, Sloth is kind. He's just been given this bad hand, by his family. And so Sloth eventually breaks the chains, grabs the Baby Ruth, takes a bite of it, and is just in love with this chocolate. And he holds up Chunk and he's holding him and he kisses him on the forehead. And the Chunk says, man, you smell like Phys Ed. So there's a lot going against Sloth. This idea, this physical characteristics, the fact that his family has disowned him for these ridiculous reasons, and that he smells like Phys Ed, which we all have, I think, at some point. The lesson here is that Chunk invites Sloth into the group of Goonies. And their challenge to save their town to get to the treasure is impeded by the Fratelli family. They would have never gotten to the treasure if they didn't have Sloth. Spoiler alert, every 80s movie ends the way you wanted it to, okay? We weren't snarky back then. We didn't have these like endings where, the villain won. Most of the time, the people we were rooting for in the theater won. They get the treasure, but only because of Sloth. Because what Sloth does is he brings out his two biggest traits, which are his physical strength, his ability to protect the group of Goonies,
Mm-hmm.
and his loyalty and his heart to the Goonies because they embraced him. They included him. And there's a big lesson in here about inclusion in our lives and in our workplaces, this idea of including everybody, regardless of their cone-shaped head or their misshapen eyes, their ears are wiggle, the fact that they may just smell like Phys Ed. And this is really important in terms of our personal growth, this idea of including everybody in both our lives and in our workplaces. Because you say it in your life, it's the right thing to do. It's the human thing to do to include everybody. But there's a whole other area here when it comes to our business and our workplace and what that means in terms of being able to solve the challenges and the problems that are in front of us. And that's what Sloth did. They had this massive challenge in front of them. They were so close to getting it, and then the Fratellis step in, and the only way they can get to that treasure and save their town is because they included Sloth. And we see that in our workplaces as well. There's a lot of different dynamics and angles that we could talk about with inclusion. I always like to talk about the new person in the company because we've all kind of been there. And I think we forget that after that first day of orientation, it's kind of like, what now? To use the Goonies, since there's a pirate ship, you're walking off the plank. And I think it's really important to remember to include everybody and remember that the new people are, feeling overwhelmed in your neighborhood, in your community, in your organization, if you have a volunteer organization, if it's a workplace, wherever there's a new person, to make sure to include that person and not just for the first day, but to make them feel welcome because they're going to bring tools to your organization that you may not have.
Absolutely. The potential for people to be able to collaborate is kind of where I go with this. And I especially see this in the entrepreneur world and very much so in the podcasting world. What we teach each other, what we bring to the table, the fact that every conversation that we have is greater than what we could say separately, right? There's something magical in the conversations. And I was thinking about that moment where Chunk is first afraid, and sometimes that happens, right? We can have fear if we're being really honest here about that which is different, or those who are new, or someone who thinks differently or brings something different to the table, and being able to set aside that fear and instead look at it as an opportunity brings about treasure. That's how I see it. I love that. That's such a fantastic observation, Chris.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. I mean, I really love this lesson. And I think when I was in the corporate world, one of the things that I struggled with, and then I had a VP of marketing who actually did something really cool because I thought this was great. But I always struggled with the idea that we always went to the people with the right title or in the right department to solve a problem. So we have a marketing issue, we have a challenge. Nobody seems to be able to come up with an answer, but we keep pounding our heads against the wall or banging our heads against the wall, trying to come up with a solution when we're struggling to do it. And sometimes this fresh voice, this fresh mind, this fresh idea. And so my VP of marketing, she put a challenge out to the rest of the company and said, if you can help us solve this problem, you can come from any department. And so ultimately we had these really interesting people coming from accounting, from operations who were helping us. And we did solve the challenge and we had all these fresh ideas. And two things happened with that. One is that we all recognize that being in a silo doesn't work. And you have to be able to, as I say, include everyone like they did with Sloth. He
Mhm.
brought this new energy and these new tools to their team. And then the second thing that we got out of this whole thing of including everybody and from these different areas is that problem solvers don't come in a one size fits all package. And I talk about that with the movie The Lost Boys because the heroes are these kids in a comic book store that save the town from vampires. But it can really be applied anywhere. Problem solvers don't come in a one size fits all package. And if you think about that in the context of including everybody, regardless of their cone shaped head and their the fact that they smell like phys ed, you might find these solutions to your problems and challenges a lot quicker. And isn't that what we want for organizations to be more efficient? So I love the Goonies and I love these characters.
Okay, so we have two, The Karate Kid and Goonies, and I know there's a third you were thinking of. Where are we going next?
The most iconic, the one that defines Gen X, I think, and every generation has a movie that defines it. And for Gen X, it's The Breakfast Club.
I knew you were going there, and I'm so glad you are.
Wow. I mean, what can I say about this movie? I run into kids today, my friends' kids that are 15, 16 years old, that say that this is their favorite movie. There is something about this movie and the themes that are going to be here well after we're gone. And so, for those of you that haven't seen The Breakfast Club, it is the iconic movie for Generation X. And it tells the story of these five kids: the brain, the athlete, the princess, the basket case, and the criminal. all in Saturday detention. I don't know if you've been in detention. I was in multiple times. I got really good at writing "I will not" 500 times on the chalkboard. And then the next week it was "I will not do something else." But they're put into Saturday detention in the library, and they're told by Principal Vernon, the hall monitor, their detention monitor, that you will sit there, you will not move from your seat, and you will write a 750-word essay on who you think you are. And so off we go on this day where these 5 different individuals from different walks of life are all forced into this room together as a punishment. But it ultimately becomes the best reward for all of them. It's got the most iconic song from the 80s, "Don't You Forget About Me." There's so much great about
The
this movie.
soundtrack. Oh, so good.
So good. And there's so many lessons in it. I actually, in my 3rd book, I have a lesson from every character in the movie, including Principal Vernon and Carl the janitor. All 7 characters have a lesson from them. But we're going to focus today on one that I think is really good for personal growth. And so we're going to dial into John Bender, the criminal, believe it or not. As I say, some of the best lessons for life and work will come from the most unexpected of places and people. And here we go
Love that.
with John Bender, the criminal, juvenile delinquent. Now, at one point in the movie, he wants to have a party in the library. And he says, Principal Vernon can see in here. When Principal Vernon goes to the bathroom, he says, "I'm going to take the screws out of the door. The door will shut and we'll be able to have a party." This is his mindset. This is how he thinks. And it's not like Principal Vernon isn't going to see the door shut. But anyway, this door is shut. So when Principal Vernon sees the door shut, he comes in, he says, "Who closed that door?" There's a whole back and forth with he and Bender. He gets all of the, like 8 more weeks or 2 more months of detention. And he's, "Don't mess with the bull. You'll get the horns." There's this great dialogue. But at one point he says, "Who took the screws out of the door?" And Bender says, "Screws fall out all the time. The world's an imperfect place." I was in an imperfect place 7 years ago when I started this journey and left the corporate world to chase this dream of speaker and author. And it was because of this line. I sat up on my couch. I just was in a job that wasn't working out with me. I was like, my screws have fallen out. I'm in an imperfect place. What am I going to do to fix it? Am I going to put those same screws back in and just kind of continue down this life of quiet desperation, as Henry David Thoreau said back in the 1840s, living this life of quiet desperation? Or was I going to find something else? And this kickstarted me on this journey of writing this article about what the Breakfast Club teaches us about problem solving, and that those screws are going to fall out. The why is important, but it's how you put them back in that really matters. And that was my key moment. And I woke up the next day, all these people were commenting on the article, and I thought, whoa, this is kind of weird. And so I wrote one on Ferris Bueller and work-life balance. Same thing happened. And I thought I got to do something with this. And so it was 18 months of burning the candle at both ends, big full-time job, going back and forth to Europe. But every moment that I had that was free, I was writing content. I published my first book. I built a website. I positioned myself as a speaker. I did all this stuff to put me in a position to say, now is the time to walk away and chase this thing that I want to do. And it all came from "Screws fall out all the time. The world's an imperfect place." So in this personal growth thing that you're talking about, I said, your screws in your life and your career are going to fall out. The why is important, but it's how you put them back in that really matters. Life is not a straight line, point A to point B. And it's up to you to decide how you're going to put those screws back in. It may be at a time in your life where you just have to put them back in the way they were because you're not quite ready yet to make this change, whatever this change is. But when they fall out a second time, take a step back and think about it really hard, because eventually, if we talk about the door, those screws are going to get rusty enough that they're not going to go back in. And then what? The why is important because you want to make sure you don't repeat your mistakes, but the how you put them back in is going to be your present and your future. That's where you're going. And this is an opportunity that's being presented to you. When those screws fall out, it's not a negative, it's an opportunity. There's a movie called Parenthood with Steve Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great scene. He's struggling with the relationship with his oldest son. It's a 1989 movie. My guess is that the son probably had ADHD or something that we weren't really talking about back then. May have been on the spectrum a little bit. So there's a struggle that's happening. The grandmother sees this in him, and she has this conversation with him. And she says, when I was younger, Granddad and he took me on a roller coaster. And she talks about that. I was thrilled and I was scared and I was excited all at the same time. And she said, some people like the merry-go-round. It just goes around. I like the roller coaster. You get more out of it. It's the same thing here with the screws falling out. Like that roller coaster of life, the ups and downs, the valleys make the peaks that much better.
Right. And what you're talking about here is choice in change, right? And that resilience. And the other phrase that came up for me is intentional design. And sometimes when things fall apart, when something happens, when you fall down, when things go off the rails, hopefully not the roller coaster, but
Yeah.
when ish hits the fan, it can be so frustrating and you can wallow. And I say take a moment to wallow, but I've also talked about like when you go through difficult times, when you go through hell, don't stop and build a house, right? And when you're going through difficult times, think about, okay, well, this happened. Now what? And ask the questions of, in this context, you would say, how do I want to put the screws back in? Do I want to change things up? Do I need to put them back in? I love that you mentioned that because as much as we want to intentionally design our lives and have choice and change things up when it warrants, the choices that we make sometimes have to be very practical. Like I cannot simply quit my job because I have bills to pay. However, does this spark a way for me, much like you did, where it's like, could I start building something that is then the thing I'm going to move to?
100%. Yeah. I mean, most of us can't just drop something huge in our life just because those screws have fallen out. We've got to find a way. But I also tell people they fell out for a reason. You got to try to identify that reason. It doesn't mean you need to move on it in that moment.
Right.
There's Oliver Wendell Holmes, I'm going to paraphrase here, but said something to the effect of that, one of the saddest things to see is when someone dies with their song still inside of them. And, we all have these lyrics inside of us. We just sometimes we don't know what they are. And sometimes some people never really discover them. I'm just saying, if those screws fall out, maybe it's time to say, like, what is this song inside of me? Maybe it's something else. Johnny Cade from The Outsiders said, you still have a lot of time to make yourself be what you want. And so
Mm.
that's for all of you out there that are not 25 or 30 or 35 or even 40 who are thinking, I'm 40, I was 46, 47 years old, thinking, oh no, that time has passed me. Nonsense. You still have a lot of time to make yourself be what you want.
There are so many examples. I cannot pull them off the top of my head, but I know I've seen it on the socials, these wonderful lists of people who have written their first novel and sold their first painting and stepped into a completely different world from what they used to and found fame and success and satisfaction at incredibly like
At a second chapter in life.
yes, mature ages. Yes, exactly. 50s, 60s, 70s,
Yeah.
you name it. So, yeah, the only timing is yours and the decision, what's the saying that the pain of staying where you are is greater than maybe the pain or the fear of what it would take to make that change, right?
Yeah, 100%. I tell people once you decide to make that change, I compare it every day in my life now is like a day when I was in seventh grade. There's the excitement of putting my football pads on, getting hit, being hit, and getting back up, and just couldn't wait for that versus the terror of peeling myself off the wall to ask a girl to dance at the middle school dance or ask for a couple skate at the roller rink. It was just so terrifying to be able to do. But that's every day in the entrepreneur. It's like the excitement and the terror. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
And I think it's also mitigating that with the idea that if you are maybe not a fan of huge change, how do you work with that? And I think encouraging the idea of asking the questions. Why did these screws fall out in the first place? That is so beautifully consistent with our conversations we have here on the podcast, where we say, put curiosity in there because curiosity takes out the judgment. Now you're not as worried about, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? Or do I feel shame? Or do I feel guilt? Or do I feel frustration? But instead, that curiosity leads you to seeking to understand why it happened and then what could happen next.
Yeah. And like to your point, you don't have to make a major change right away. Start small and just see what it does for you. I wrote an article, and now I have 3 books and I'm a keynote speaker. You have to start somewhere. Just recognize that it's a little bit of a sign when those screws fall out. And For most of us, it's telling us something. It could be small, it could be big, but it's telling you something.
Well, I was about to ask you what you would want to leave us with as a point of encouragement, and I think that was it. So, with that, let's start wrapping things up here. But before we do, let us know where we can find you online and what you have to offer, how we can support you.
Great. Yeah, the best place is chrisclews.com, ChrisClews.com, my website where you can explore more about me. I have videos up there. I have my content for speaking, who I've spoken to, where my books are, all of that stuff. And then on social media, I have a couple of different handles, but I guess, at Chris Clews 80s, 80S on Instagram, Chris Clews on LinkedIn and Facebook, nothing spectacular there. And then on Twitter, on X, I somehow, some way got at 80s pop culture. I don't know
Nice.
how I got that handle, but I feel like there might be somebody out there who wants to buy it from me and I'd be happy to sell it. So I think chrisclews.com is probably the best place to go to get more information on me.
Okay. And on the socials, I'll make sure to have these links in the show notes. And on the socials, we get to see pictures of Bodhi. And
Yes.
that is also a perfect segue to another thing that's really important to you. And I would love for you to share it now. And I noticed that you actually take some of the money that you make, like from your book sales and your speaking gigs and stuff like that, and you donate to a cause. Would you like to share a bit about that?
I use the movie Dead Poet Society to talk about, this lesson of advocating for something that's important to you. He says, no matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. And that's talking the talk, but you got to walk the walk as well. How are you going to, what action are you going to take? For me, it's animal rescue was ingrained in me from my grandmother who did it in the 40s and 50s before it was even a thing, down to my mom and to my sister and I. And so it's a really important thing for me. I give a portion of the proceeds to Wonder Paul's Rescue, which is a rescue that saved my Bodhi boy. Bodhi's named after Patrick Swayze's character in Point Break. And, he's gotten me through a lot. The worst part of my life, he was there for me. There was a really rough 100 days where I lost a few really important people to me, including my mom, my stepmom, who'd been in my life for 39 years, my girlfriend, who was on a journey of her own. She had lost her daughter, and I knew when we met, she wasn't going to stay in my life forever. I had accepted that. She had a journey, but, she happened to leave in March of 21. My stepmom passed in April of 21. My mom passed in July of 21. And all along, I had this guy next to me, by my side, unconditional love. And that's what it's about. And I say rescue's the best breed. If you're thinking about getting a dog, a cat, a rabbit, a guinea pig, a horse, a snake, what if that's your thing, whatever, there's a rescue for it. There's so many that need homes. I can talk about dogs. Over 1 million are going to be euthanized this year, happy, healthy dogs, because they can't find a home. So do your part. And also, if you have kids, you're passing it to them. You're showing them, if you're not a doctor, if you're not an EMT, if you're not in the fire department, this is how you can save a life, by rescuing an animal.
So true. And you know what? They save you right back in so many ways.
Yeah.
We have a bonded pair of cats. They're definitely litter mates, and you can tell who the older sister is. I'm talking to you, Cleo, and our Cosmo girl, who's pure love. And I wouldn't have it any other way. And they have saved us so many times. Okay, thank you for that. All right, now let's step into our rapid wrap up. We're going to go 3 things that inspire positively living for you: a song, a saying, and a resource. Let's start with a song. You probably have something from the 80s. You don't have to, but go ahead and give us a song for the playlist.
Yeah, I would say for me, if I was to think about a song for that, it would probably be Alive and Kicking by Simple Minds.
Yeah.
That song just gets me fired up when I hear it.
That's going on the Positively Living podcast playlist. We're probably at volume 4 now. I don't even know, but it's a great collection of songs, and now we're adding the 80s to it. All right, how about a saying? You've mentioned a few already, but a mantra, it could be an actual quote or just something that you share with people to inspire.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the one from the outside. I mean, it's on my arm here. You still have a lot of time to make yourself be what you want, from the outsiders. And I think it's a really important thing for everyone to hear, that you do. It's never too late to discover who you are and to try to do something with it. I think it's really important for people to remember that. It doesn't matter your stage in life. Don't accept that I'm already here, I'm already there. You still have a lot of time to make yourself be what you want.
Love that. Okay, now how about a resource? It could be a book, an app, just anything that makes life better for you.
For me, it's the gym. Getting a workout in every day is important to me. It helps me mentally and physically. At my age now, at 54 years old, it's even more important to do that for me anyway.
Yeah.
And so I would say, like, if I don't get a workout in, something, it affects me mentally, and I have to go back to the don't forget to breathe. Very important.
Then you've just inspired somebody to bring back some exercise that maybe they didn't before. And you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. It feeds into your productivity. It boosts those endorphins. It makes life so much better. Okay, and last little bonus round here is let's share some gratitude. What or who contributes to positively living for you, besides Bodhi, of course?
Yeah. Besides Bodhi, my sister, we're really close. We've gone through a lot together. And so we're, 8 years apart, I think. But we're really, really close. We continue to get closer and closer as we grew older. I was away from home quite a bit when she was younger, because I went to college and she was 10. And so 10 to 14, I was basically gone. And then I got home for 6 months and moved to Florida from Maryland. So, I missed a lot of that time where she was growing up, but we have become so close. She is my best friend. And so we travel 4 or 5 times a year to see each other back and forth from Florida to Maryland.
That's wonderful. What's your sister's name?
Ashley.
Ashley. Shout out to Ashley. I love that. Okay, and with that, Chris, I am grateful for you. I'm grateful that we connected, that we got to talk the 80s, because I absolutely love that. And I want to thank you for shining your light so brightly in this world and for sharing it with us so freely.
Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate the opportunity, and stay rad, everybody.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback or questions, you can find me through the Connect page of the positivelyproductive.com website. And if you're looking for any of the resources mentioned here, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.